The richest Asian family in Africa does not live in a palace. The man at the head of their $2 billion empire has worn the same wristwatch for 65 years. He owns exactly 5 suits, and he is chauffeured around Nairobi in a modest Toyota. But here's the part nobody tells you. This family has survived the Great Depression, a world war, the end of an empire, and a dictator who erased fortunes overnight. And they did it by following 3 rules that most rich families break. This is Asian Dynasty. Today, we are going to Kenya to meet a dynasty that built factories in 45 countries out of a tiny grocery shop. And by the end, you will know the 3 rules that kept them rich for over a century, while louder fortunes burned to the ground. Stay for the last rule. It is the reason you have probably never heard their name. Nairobi, Kenya, East Africa's largest city, a skyline of glass towers, and below it, one of the biggest concentrations of quiet wealth on the continent. If you drive through this city, you will see the family's name everywhere without realizing it. On a hospital wing, on a school of business, on a maternity ward, but almost never in a headline. That is by design. The family is called Chandaria, and their story starts with a man who could barely read. To understand how an Indian family ended up ruling African industry, you need one piece of history. At the turn of the 20th century, the British Empire shipped tens of thousands of indentured workers from India to East Africa to build the Uganda Railway, a line so brutal the press nicknamed it the Lunatic Express. Workers died of disease, exhaustion, and in one infamous stretch at Tsavo, in the jaws of 2 man-eating lions. When the railway was done, many of the survivors stayed, and traders from India followed them in. They opened the little shops called Dukas that stitched the new colony together. Out of that world came this dynasty. In 1915, a merchant named Manu Chandaria left Saurashtra in Gujarat, India, and sailed for British East Africa. He was, by his own family's account, close to penniless, and he could barely read or write. He opened a small provisions shop on Biashara Street in Nairobi. Biashara literally means business in Swahili. The family lived in Ngara, in a house shared with 3 other families. No empire, no factories, a counter, some shelves, and sacks of flour and salt. For years, that shop was everything. Premchand's sons worked the counter after school, weighing out rice, counting change. One of those boys born above that world in 1929 was named Manu. Remember that name because 8 decades later, the Queen of England would pin a medal on his chest. Then came the first test, the Great Depression. Businesses across the colony were collapsing, and one of them was a small, failed venture called Kenya Aluminium. In 1929, the Chandarias joined a group of 10 investors who bought the dying company for almost nothing. It made pots and pans. That is it. Aluminum cookware for ordinary families. Most ambitious merchants would have chased gold, land, or coffee. The Chandarias chose saucepans. And that was rule number 1. Make the boring things everybody needs. The company became Calaworks. Within a few years, its workforce grew to around 800 people, and the product line grew from pots and pans to hurricane lamps, pressure stoves, and nails. Nothing glamorous, everything essential. When money is tight, people skip luxuries. They do not skip cooking dinner or roofing their house. Boring, it turns out, is bulletproof. Now watch what the family did with the next generation, because this is where most rich families fail. Manu Chandaria was sent to study in India at the University of Bombay, and this is not the story of a spoiled heir. Through 4 years in Bombay, Manu owned 3 shirts, 2 pairs of trousers, 2 pairs of underwear, and 1 pair of socks. Every single day, he spent an hour spinning thread for handlooms, following the example of Mahatma Gandhi, whose independence movement was electrifying India at the time. That discipline never left him. From India, he went to the United States, and in 1951 he came home to Nairobi with a master's degree in engineering from the University of Oklahoma. A young man with an American degree could have gone anywhere. Instead, he walked into the family's aluminum plant and took a job as the second plant engineer. Not director, not owner, an engineer on the factory floor at a salary reported to be lower than what the family's own accountants were making. His father told the sons the business was a family trust, and everyone would serve it before they profited from it. The Chandarias are Oswal Jains, part of a tight-knit merchant community from Gujarat, and in that tradition, the family, not the individual, is the unit of wealth. Decades later, Manu would say that keeping the family together was harder than building the business, and more important, brothers, sons, and cousins were each trained, sent abroad for engineering degrees, and then slotted into the empire wherever the empire needed them. No one flashed the money because the money belonged to no one. It belonged to the system, and serve it they did. Through the 50s and 60s, the brothers and cousins fanned out across borders. New plants in Uganda, Tanzania, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Congo, Zambia, even back to India. In 1960, they set up a company in London called Comcraft, short for Commercial Craft, as the coordination hub for what was quietly becoming a multinational. In the early 60s, they founded Mabati Rolling Mills, which started out rolling about 20,000 tons of steel a year. Today, it is the largest steel manufacturer in Kenya. Its parent, the Safal Group, is now the largest maker of steel roofing products in sub-Saharan Africa, with more than 30 plants across 14 countries. Think about that. From saucepans to nails to the roofs over millions of African homes. If you have stood under a metal roof anywhere from Nairobi to Lagos, there is a real chance the Chandarias rolled that steel. We are halfway up this story, and this is where it turns dark. Quick pause. If you are finding this valuable, tell me in the comments which city you are watching from, because what happens next erased some of the greatest fortunes on this continent, and it is the reason rule number 2 exists. August 1972, Uganda. A military dictator named Idi Amin goes on the radio and gives every Asian in the country 90 days to leave. Around 80,000 people, families who had been there for 3 generations, businesses, homes, bank accounts, all seized. Consider the Madhvani family, Uganda's sugar kings. Their founder, Muljeebhai Madhvani, had bought 800 acres at Kakira back in 1918 and built a sugar empire of 52 companies. In 1972, the Madhvanis walked out of Uganda with almost nothing. 52 companies gone in 90 days. They would spend 13 years in exile before returning in 1985 to rebuild from the wreckage. Today, their Kakira operation is worth an estimated $750 million. A remarkable comeback, but a generation of wealth was simply erased. Now ask yourself why the Chandarias were not destroyed by that same storm. They had factories in Uganda too. Here is the answer. Rule number 2. Never keep your fortune in one country. By 1972, the Chandaria Empire was already spread across more than a dozen borders, coordinated from London. When one country turned hostile, the family absorbed the hit and kept rolling steel everywhere else. What looked like paranoid overexpansion in the 60s turned out to be the single greatest insurance policy in African business history. Today, Comcraft operates in around 45 countries across Africa, Asia, and Europe, employs tens of thousands of people, and generates revenues estimated at over $2 billion a year. The exact numbers are a family secret. Forbes once valued the group at around $2.5 billion, and estimates of the family fortune run from just under $2 billion to well beyond it. Manu Chandaria has been asked about his net worth in interview after interview for decades. He has never once answered, which brings us to the strangest part of this story, and rule number 3, live like the money is not yours. Manu Chandaria is now 97 years old. He is one of the most decorated businessmen in African history. And here is his lifestyle. 5 suits in the wardrobe, 1 wristwatch, the same one worn for 65 years, a modest Toyota on Nairobi roads that has genuinely puzzled Kenyans who spot it. The family follows Jainism, one of the world's oldest religions built on non-violence and non-attachment. And Manu puts the family philosophy in one sentence: the wealth that you have is not yours. You are only the trustee of the wealth you have. That is not a slogan. In 1955, before the family was even famous, they created the Chandaria Foundation. Since then, the family has poured out donations reported at over 13 billion Kenyan shillings, roughly $100 million, into schools, hospitals, and universities across Kenya and beyond. Walk into Kenyatta National Hospital and you will find the Chandaria Wing. In 2003, Queen Elizabeth II made him an Officer of the Order of the British Empire. Kenya gave him the Elder of the Burning Spear, one of its highest civilian honors. And in 2022, at 93 years old, Manu Chandaria became the first African ever awarded the Carnegie Medal of Philanthropy, the same honor given to the Rockefeller and Gates families. He says his one regret, looking back at nearly a century, is this: if I were to live my life all over again, I would serve people more than I serve myself. Now, before we crown them, let us be honest about the numbers, because there is a challenger. The single richest person of Asian descent in Africa, according to Forbes, is not a Chandaria. His name is Mohammed Dewji, Tanzania. His grandfather and father, Gujarati traders like Premchand, built a commodity business called METL in the 1970s. Mo Dewji took it over and turned it into Tanzania's largest conglomerate, with operations in around 10 countries. Under his watch, the group's reported revenues climbed past $1 billion a year, with a workforce in the tens of thousands, and Dewji has said the business accounts for a meaningful slice of Tanzania's entire economy. Forbes puts his personal fortune at around $2.1 billion, making him East Africa's only dollar billionaire on the list, and for years he was the youngest billionaire on the entire continent. His story even carries a warning about what visible wealth attracts. In October 2018, Dewji was kidnapped at gunpoint outside a Dar es Salaam gym and held for 9 days before being released. He has since pledged at least half his fortune to charity through the Giving Pledge. So the richest Asian individual in Africa is Mo Dewji. But a dynasty is not one man. Measured as a family, as a single fortune built and held together across 4 generations and more than a century, the crown still sits quietly in Nairobi with the family that never talks about it. And that is the real lesson of the Chandarias. Every rule they follow points the same direction. Make boring things because boring survives. Spread across borders because storms come. And hold the money like a trustee because the moment wealth becomes your identity, it owns you. In June of 2026, at 97 years old, Manu Chandaria was not on a yacht. He was signing an agreement to build a leadership center in honor of Kenya's late Prime Minister. Still giving, still building. 111 years after his father stepped off a boat with nothing. A shop on Biashara Street became roofs over millions of homes. And the man who could buy almost anything still winds the same watch he wore as a young engineer. Maybe that is what the richest family in Africa actually understands. Wealth that whispers lasts longer than wealth that shouts. If this story surprised you, you should see what we found when we traced the richest Asian dynasty in Dubai, a man who slept on orphanage floors while running 2,000 stores. That story is on your screen right now. This is Asian Dynasty, and the quiet ones are always richer than they look.